For thousands of years, civilizations whispered the same terrifying memory. A memory of a sky that would not stop raining, a sea that rose like a living monster, and entire nations swallowed in a single night. Different continents, different cultures, different centuries, yet all of them remembered a single catastrophe, a great flood so vast, so violent, that the world itself seemed to end. But what if this wasn't just a myth? What if the disaster was real? And far more devastating than the legends ever revealed. Tonight, we explore the floods that reshaped continents, destroyed ancient kingdoms, and wiped out entire civilizations. You're watching Biography Plus. Human history begins with memory. Memories passed from voice to voice, carved onto clay, painted onto stone, whispered through generations. Among these memories, none appears more often, more urgently, or more universally than the memory of a great flood. From the icy shores of Scandinavia to the burning sands of North Africa, from the mountains of China to the jungles of Mesoamerica, ancient people carried the same fear that once the waters rose. But to understand why nearly every civilization remembers a global flood, we must travel back long before writing, before cities, before kings. Back to a time when the earth itself was a giant locked in ice. Around 12,000 years ago, colossal ice sheets covered Europe, North America, and Asia, giant frozen continents of their own. These walls of ice were taller than modern skyscrapers, thicker than mountain ranges. Beneath them, massive lakes formed, storing water with a pressure unimaginable to the ancient world. The people living near these sheets, small tribes of hunters and gatherers, had no idea that the ground under their feet was a ticking bomb. Then, the world began to warm, slowly at first, then violently. As temperatures rose, the ice began to melt, and enormous lakes grew behind fragile ice dams. One of these lakes, Lake Agassiz, stretched across what is now Canada and the northern United States. It held more water than all of today's Great Lakes combined. And then, it broke. No one knows exactly how long the rupture took. Minutes, hours, days. But the result was something the planet had not seen in tens of thousands of years. A wall of water thousands of kilometers wide surged across the landscape, ripping through forests, carving new rivers, and creating massive inland seas. The tremendous pressure forced rivers to reverse their flow, pushing water straight into the Atlantic Ocean. Scientists believe this cataclysm, known as the Younger Dryas Flood, triggered abrupt climate collapse across the planet. Europe froze again, Asia cooled, weather patterns shifted, entire animal populations vanished, and the tribes living in these lands faced storms, famine, migration, and destruction on a biblical scale. To them, the world hadn't changed, the world had ended. Centuries later, when civilizations finally learned to write, they didn't describe the climate science of the Ice Age. They told stories, stories of a world drowned by the gods. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes waters so powerful that even the gods feared the storm. The Bible speaks of fountains of the deep bursting forth. Greek myths describe the flood of Deucalion. Hindu scriptures speak of Manu saved by a mysterious fish. Nordic legends describe rising seas that swallowed ancient coastlines. Australian Aboriginal nations tell of ancestral lands drowned by the ocean. And Native American tribes from Alaska to Florida recount the same memory. A great water came. But what were these floods? And were they separate events, or pieces of the same global catastrophe? To answer that, we move from myth to archaeology. On the floor of the North Sea lies one of the most extraordinary lost worlds ever discovered, Doggerland. Once, it was a vast plain connecting Britain to the rest of Europe, full of rivers, forests, and thriving human settlements. Archaeologists have recovered tools, weapons, animal bones, and signs of complex hunter-gatherer communities. But around 8,200 years ago, something catastrophic occurred. A massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, the Storegga slide, triggered tsunamis that swept across the entire European coastline. These tsunami waves, some up to 25 meters high, smashed into Doggerland, wiping out entire communities in minutes. Imagine families sitting around fires, children playing near river banks, hunters returning with food, and suddenly a wall of water, taller than a building, rising out of the horizon, roaring toward them with no escape. Within centuries, Doggerland was gone, drowned beneath the North Sea forever. But Doggerland wasn't the only civilization lost. In the Mediterranean, scientists discovered evidence of another catastrophic event, the flooding of the Black Sea basin. Thousands of years ago, the Black Sea was not a sea at all, but a massive freshwater lake surrounded by early farming civilizations. But around 5600 BCE, rising global sea levels caused the Mediterranean to burst through the Bosporus Strait, sending salt water crashing into the lake with unimaginable force. This wasn't a slow flood. This was an explosion of water. Villages were destroyed, farms erased, thousands fled the rising waters. Many scholars believe this event became the origin of the great flood stories across the Near East. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the rivers Tigris and Euphrates repeatedly unleashed devastating floods. Archaeologists digging beneath ancient cities like Ur, Kish, and Shuruppak have found massive flood layers, thick deposits of river mud laid down by catastrophic deluges. The most famous of these floods occurred around 2900 BCE, destroying entire Sumerian settlements. This event is described vividly in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim recounts water so fierce that even the gods fled to the heavens, and in Egypt, around 4000 BCE, the Nile experienced its most extreme floods recorded in geological history. These were not the gentle seasonal floods Egyptians relied upon. These were destructive torrents that erased entire villages along the river banks. Even farther east, in China, the legendary Great Flood of Emperor Yu, once dismissed as a myth, has now been confirmed by geological evidence. Around 1900 BCE, the Yellow River experienced a catastrophic flood so powerful it reshaped the landscape and wiped out early Neolithic cultures. This wasn't a single flood. This was an era of chaos. Civilizations drowned in different regions, but remembered a single idea: the world once washed clean. But the story doesn't end with floods, because as the waters receded, humanity changed. New civilizations emerged: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, ancient Greece, China, all rising on lands made fertile by the very floods that once destroyed everything. It is possible, even likely, that the Great Flood memories were preserved not because they destroyed humanity, but because they reshaped it. Ancient people didn't just remember destruction. They remembered survival. They remembered the few who lived to rebuild, the families who escaped to higher ground, the communities that grew into civilizations. Over time, these survivors became heroes in legend: Utnapishtim, Noah, Deucalion, Manu, each representing the memory of a real, ancient survivor who carried the story forward. And today, as global sea levels rise again, as storms intensify, as coastlines shift, the ancient warnings echo louder. Civilizations believe they rise forever, but water has always had other plans. Perhaps the real lesson of the Great Flood is not about punishment, but about humility. Humanity believes it commands the earth, but the oceans do not listen, the sky does not obey, and water, silent, patient, unstoppable, always returns to claim what was once its own. You've been watching Biography Plus. If you believe history still speaks, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.